Okay, thank you very much for this very nice introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation to this meeting. So I just wanted to say a few words about the latest developments of the EU policy and the latest results of the European Environment Agency's annual Trends and Projections report. This illustration here shows the climate and energy targets for 2020, 2030 and 2050. And I would like to briefly walk you through these targets to put the latest agreements in the European climate law in this broader context. So the three interrelated EU headline targets for 2020 were adopted in 2007. And they were to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 20% compared to 1990, to achieve 20% share of renewables in overall energy use, and to achieve 20% saving of the EU's energy consumption. And then in 2015, when the EU ratified the Paris Agreement, it adopted the EU-wide targets for 2030. Again, greenhouse gas emissions now minus 40%. Renewable energy share for at least 32% of the EU's gross final energy consumption, and to achieve at least 32.5% improvement in the energy efficiency. So to make the EU economy climate compatible in the longer term, the European Council endorsed in 2009 the objective to reduce EU greenhouse gas emissions by 80 to 95% below 1990 levels. In 2019 then, when Ursula von der Leyen became the president of the European Commission, she presented the European Green Deal and the ambition for Europe to become the first climate neutral continent. And now the European climate law sets this climate neutrality target for 2050 into binding legislation. And this was really a major achievement in the negotiations that led to the adoption of the European climate law. And the law also sets in legislation a higher ambition for 2030 with a net emission target of minus 55% for 2030 compared to 1990. And to ensure that the target is first and foremost achieved by greenhouse gas emission reductions, the removals that can contribute to achieving net zero emissions are limited, as you can see here. These EU internal targets were always aligned with the EU pledges for international commitments under the UNFCCC as well. Now, in order to deliver on the European Green Deal and to achieve these targets that were stipulated in the European climate law, the European Commission proposed a raft of legislative proposals in last summer that are currently discussed in the European Parliament and the member states. And these proposals cover climate, energy, transport, and taxation. And for climate, for example, we had an increase in the emission reductions covered by the EU emission trading and also by the EU effort sharing, the non-trading sectors. We have EU-wide targets for the land use sector. For energy, for example, there are stronger targets proposed for renewable energy and energy efficiency. For transport, we have stronger CO2 emission standards for cars and vans. And one example for taxation is the carbon border adjustment mechanism. The European agency's core business in this is to provide timely, sound, and independent data and information on the environment and climate to policymakers and the public. So our climate and energy indicators are one of the important vehicles in this mission. And I have listed here the indicators that have been updated in October this year and are most relevant for the elements of the Fit for 55 package that I just mentioned. And I added hyperlinks to this slide, assuming that you will receive this presentation later. So these indicator assessments form an important basis for the annual trends and projections report, our flagship report on climate and energy at the EU. And in no, that's not good. So, and in this annual trends and projections report, we look at the progress of the EU and its member states towards reaching the climate and energy targets in these 3 dimensions that I have mentioned before: greenhouse gas reduction targets, renewable targets, energy efficiency targets, and for the years 2020, 2030, and an outlook for 2050 as well. And in the next few slides, I would like to show you the results of the latest trends and projections report. This visualization summarizes the EU member states' progress towards their 3 targets for 2020 at a national level. The assessment is based on preliminary data for 2020. Let's have a closer look at the 3 dimensions. So for greenhouse gas emissions, the national targets for 2020 are governed by the effort sharing decision, with annual target trajectories for each country between 2013 and 2020. And the 21 countries that you see here with the blue top of the pyramid have reached the annual targets for 2020, and the ones with the red top have not. And overall, the overachievement of several countries make up for the lack of achievement in others, and the EU as a whole is reaching the 2020 target. For renewables, we have 22 countries meeting the target. You can see if they are blue in the middle of the pyramid. And for energy efficiency, we have 2 targets that we measure progress to. One is primary and the other one is final energy consumption. And in both areas, we have 20 who achieved 20 countries who achieved their targets by the year 2020. I'm shifting now more to the EU level, showing you the historic trends and the projections for the 3 dimensions: greenhouse gases, renewables, and energy efficiency. First, greenhouse gas emissions. This is the EU's greenhouse gas emission trend from 1990 to 2035. And for the 2020 target, we look at emission trends without LULUCF. For 2030 and 2050, we look at emission trends with LULUCF in line with the scope of our new targets. The 20% reduction target for 2020 was met or even overachieved, and emissions between 1990 and 2020 decreased by 31%. The new -55 net emission target for 2030 and the net emission target for 2050 will not be reached according to current projections. And if we continue to reduce our emissions at a pace at the same pace of the last decade, the 2 gray boxes show that very clearly. So between 1990 and 2020, in the last decade, we saw an average annual emission reduction of 53 megatons. In order to reach the -55 target by 2030, we will need to reduce our emissions by 137 megatons on average per year, and that year on year until 2030. But this is not impossible because the proposed Fit for 55 policy package was developed to set the relevant sectors on that path to this new 2030 target. And the future projections should be oriented then on this new and more ambitious targets. So what I want to say is that these projections here are not taking into account the new legislative proposals that are currently on the table. and that will help us achieve these new, more ambitious targets. Achievements in emission reductions since 2005 vary a lot between the sectors. So the highest reductions are observed in the energy supply sector, where emissions decreased by around 40% between 2005 and 2020. The blue bars here show the greenhouse gas emissions in the years stated on the top left. The energy supply sector is also the largest source, as you can see here in the donut chart. And however, considerably greater efforts are needed in the transport and agriculture sector, where emissions fell only by 14% and 2% respectively since 2005. So it's also important to say that while energy supply is widely covered by the EU emission trading system, transport and agriculture are addressed by national targets and therefore require further implementation of measures at the national level. Now, let's have a look at the second dimension, the trends and progress to renewable energy targets. Preliminary data for 2020 suggests that the EU27 achieved a total share of renewable energy of about 21.3% in 2020. And therefore, it appears that the EU has achieved its 2020 targets of a minimum of 20% renewable energy share. This 32% renewable energy target was aligned with Europe's original 40% greenhouse gas emission reduction target by 2030. And to achieve the new net 55% target, the renewable energy share in 2030 will need to be greater. So the European Commission has proposed to increase the 2030 target for renewable energy shares to 40% to contribute to the minus 55 greenhouse gas reduction. Lastly, the trends and progress of the energy efficiency, the third dimension. For energy efficiency, the outlook to the 2020 target has been uncertain for several years and has often shown diverging trends. However, preliminary data for the year 2020 indicates that energy consumption for the EU27 was 2.6% below the 2020 target for final energy consumption and 5% below the target for primary energy consumption. And this shift in 2020 means that the EU27 met and overachieved the 2020 target in its final year after not having been on track for quite some time before. Obviously, this is related to the measures tackling the COVID-19 pandemic. In the proposal for the revised energy efficiency target, that the European Commission has proposed more ambitious 2030 target also for the energy efficiency target, and corresponding to a reduction of 36% for final energy consumption and 39% for primary energy consumption compared to the 27 baseline projections of the European Commission. Now, this last slide here provides you with a list of the EA's October publication package related to the Trends and Projections report, including, again, the links. And we also prepared a climate and energy platform with an array of data visualizations on the topics that I have mentioned.